So good afternoon. Welcome to our Conservation Easements and Real Estate Education Lunch and Learn program. I'm Lisa Ginsburg. We also have Anne Marie Allen today with us, and we're your staff liaisons. If you have any questions, you can chat anything to us in the chat box and we'll make sure to help you. Just a couple of housekeeping announcements. Please keep yourself on mute, and I think that most of you are. And if you'd like to, we'd love to see you. So turn your camera on so that we can see you. It definitely makes for a better presentation and an easier presentation for the instructors. If you do have a question relating to the subject matter today, the topic on conservation easements, please put it into the chat box, and Jim and Kris will be answering questions towards the end of the presentation. As a reminder, this program will be recorded, and early next week, you'll get a copy, as will all of our members, of the recording, as well as the presentation that they prepared for today. Just a couple, sorry, okay, thanks Donna for letting us know. I appreciate it about your camera not working. We have one exciting project I wanted to mention, and I think Christy Minette is on, so I think she's on. So Christy, if you want to jump in, you can, but Christy is the host. Do you want to jump in and I'll put the link in, Christy? I didn't prepare this, so this is just, sorry, Christy.
I'll turn my camera on for this. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Well, actually, good afternoon. I am just here to pop in and tell you that we have a really great podcast. I think it's great.
It is great. Yes.
It's great as well. And Lisa just put it in the chat there, a link for it. We have a new podcast called Killing It in Real Estate, and it's really about how we can work together to help you kill it in real estate. We've had a couple guests on so far, Lynn Scherer as one, and I see she's on here today. We've also had Alex Schneider and Jamie Ridge. So stay tuned for several other great guests coming up. And if you have ideas for the podcast, we are looking into how to get you guys involved as well. So you can listen to it on your favorite platform. I know it's available on Apple and Spotify. And also, if you go to the bucksrealtor.com's website, there is a link right there for you to be able to take a listen. So have a listen. We're only 3 episodes in, and hope for many more, and hope to get you guys involved soon.
Thanks, Christy. Thanks. Sorry for not planning that in ahead.
Oh, no worries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And again, I put the link for the podcast into the chat, so please take a listen. It's really fun, and it's great, a great way to learn things. It's my pleasure to introduce our instructors today. We have Jim Engel, who's the executive director of Tinicum Conservancy. He's been involved in the land trust community for more than 25 years in several executive roles. Currently, he serves in the jack of all trades position with the Conservancy as the lead staff in land protection, fundraising, and governance. During his tenure, the Conservancy has protected more than 2,500 acres. We also have Kern. She is the director of resource protection for Heritage Conservancy. And Kris has 20 years of land use planning and conservation experience. In her current role, she leads the team responsible for working with private landowners and local governments to permanently protect land and natural resources. We're thrilled to have both of you with us today, and I'm going to mute so you can begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. We appreciate that, and we appreciate everyone that's shown up today. One term we're going to use are land conservancies or land trusts. They are interchangeable. So if you happen to be working with a property that has a conservation easement, you might see either name used with an organization, and that's very similar. The presentation that we're going to do, and then you can leave your questions in the comments, we'll answer towards the end of the presentation. Hopefully that works for everyone. And, we're really looking forward and appreciate that you've all shown up, because conservation easements have been a phenomena that's really been going since 1976, and now it's taken off in the last 20 years. Nationwide, there's more than 65 million acres protected under conservation easements. Land conservancies and land trusts are often involved in that. But it is a big deal. And if you are doing real estate deals in the Bucks County area and you're outside a township, you're probably going to find conservation easements on some of the parcels. So this is a great way to learn more. And, okay. So my presentation is not moving. I had it going before.
You can't forward it. It's not, okay. Maybe start it over again.
Yeah, I'm going to try again to start it over. Yes, resume. Okay. Oh, there we go. Hold on one second. All right. So what are conservation easements? They really are something that empower landowners to create a legacy, both for their family and the community. And it is an opportunity for someone to continue to own their land and manage it into the future. But the details around conservation easements are that they're legal agreements between a landowner and a land conservancy and or a government agency. So sometimes these easements are held by government agencies only, a local township, a county, a state, or even a federal agency. And then in some cases, conservancies hold those easements by themselves. And then in some cases, there's a partnership, and you have what we call co-holders of those easements. Many of you may be familiar with the term conservation easement or the word easement itself. But a lot of times when you think of an easement, you're thinking of something that is for a driveway, a power line, a gas line, those types of things. We do not have a right of use with the property with a conservation easement, but they are designed to protect the environmental and agricultural resources of the property. And that is really the main focus of those easements. Every easement's going to be a little different. It also outlines the rights reserved by the landowner. It might include additional residences. If it's an agricultural property, it might include barns and outbuildings, which are in different parts of the property. But that's all laid out in this agreement. And then finally, conservation easements, with a few rare exceptions, are in perpetuity. They are forever. So while the landowner continues to own the land and they can sell it or pass it along to their children, those agreements, the conservation easements, continue with that property into perpetuity. Kris, anything else you want to say about that? Or
no, you touched on it, Jim, but I just think it's important to emphasize that the purpose, and intent behind a conservation easement is to protect identified conservation values. And so the easement very intentionally limits certain uses and improvements in order to protect what we've identified as special.
Sure. And, another thing is, and we always emphasize this, you may see a conservation easement on a particular property. Each easement's going to be a unique document. There are certain core parts of it that will always be the same, but it is written to reflect the values of the donor. So if the donor is trying to protect their farmland, you're going to see a lot of language and restrictions as well as rights around that farming practice. But maybe someone owns the land just for its natural beauty. They love the stream. So you're going to see more of the biological resources protected within that agreement. The other things that make these different is that they've evolved over the last 40 years. So an easement from 1980 written by the township may look extremely different than an easement written in 2020 by a conservancy or other local government agency. So if you're representing someone, either a buyer or a seller, and you hear there's a conservation easement on the property, you don't necessarily want to assume you understand everything about that easement. You'll want to take a look at that document carefully just to see how it's set up. It is enforceable, unlike a deed restriction, which is often tied to a township and really depends on that township keeping up on that deed restriction. Conservancies and government agencies are required to enforce that easement and monitor that easement, every year. And Kris will talk about that more later. So the Conservancy is there to work with people, but it's also there to make sure that the parts of the easement and the language of the easement are upheld. It is also recorded and part of the legal title. So when you're, as an agent, looking at a property, these documents, the easement, will show up in the title search. And it's probably good to look at it whether you're selling the property for your client or buying the property for your client. You want to look at that easement fairly early in the process. Kris?
All right, thanks, Jim. So benefits of a conservation easement, and we'll be taking a look at this from a couple different perspectives. The first being the property owners of the land. And before I get started, I should comment the picture of this lovely couple. I was inspired by tomorrow's forecast for snow, and my very astute colleague, Jim, recognized that that is not a traditional Pennsylvania landscape. It is, in fact, in Hawaii. So when you're shivering tomorrow, you can think of that. But, most importantly for a lot of the folks that we work with is the ability to protect the lands that they love, whether they've owned it for 10 years or it's been in their family for multiple generations. And that is certainly one of the most satisfying things to work with a property owner in achieving. Another level of that, which can be equally as important, are financial considerations and benefits that may come along with granting a conservation easement. There are funding opportunities available, and as a land trust, that is something that we do to work with landowners, trying to identify sources that will fund a conservation easement. The easement is valued through a qualified appraisal. So we do have a number that is associated with the value of the easement, and that could either be paid in cash to the landowner, the full amount, or it could be a partial payment and a partial donation, or if we're lucky, it could be a full donation of a conservation easement, and the full value is donated. And if that is done, there we go. There may be potential tax deductions that folks can take specifically on their federal taxes. And they were permanently enhanced, oh gosh, nearly 10 years ago. So, and this is the part of the show where we always say to our landowners that we don't provide legal or financial advice. We recommend that all of our property owners do seek professional guidance to help them in making that decision on their particular circumstances with their taxes. And it also, as the next bullet shows, lowers estate taxes, which is particularly true in Pennsylvania. That is not the case in all states. So between the two, it often gives people the ability to remain on their property with a little cash in hand or financial benefit without having to sell and leave their loved land. Next slide. Beyond the individual property owner, we're looking more broadly at the community. The report that's shown on the right-hand side of the screen, report or return on environment, was done in 2011 by an organization called Green Space Alliance and the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. And although it is got more than 10 years on it, I would hope that the numbers are even better. But the document did research and found that homes within a mile of protected open space can see increased property values, an average of $10,000. There was one case study where it was as much as $50,000. Looking again at the broader community, you know, we all choose where we want to live, and certainly the protected lands that we have around us add to our quality of life and make our places and communities special. Very practical, it keeps local farms in operation, gives us sources of locally produced food, can reduce flooding. The less impervious surfaces attributed to higher development can help manage stormwater. And looking at the environment, which is our main purpose for doing this, certainly the conservation easements bring about many benefits for wildlife habitat, species, biodiversity, again, helping to ensure that we have clean air and water. The same report that I referenced previously also did an analysis of savings that can be attributed to natural ecosystem services that provide things like stormwater management, carbon sequestration. And if we did not have that protected land, it would cost us $133 million to provide the same level of services. And a good example of that is New York State has done a lot of land preservation to provide to protect land within its watershed, to protect its drinking water quality. And so they've put that upfront cost into land conservation to have being able to avoid more treatment of their water and having more readily available clean water.
And Kris, you may have mentioned this, but this report, we're going to have a link on the
Thanks, Jim.
page if you'd like to look at this report and look at the economic benefits.
And in addition to that one, you'll see some communities have done it on smaller scales. I think they've also been done maybe on state levels as well. So if you're interested in going beyond the Philadelphia area, there are some other studies out there if you did a quick search. Now we're going to look into the role of conservancies and land trusts. As Jim said, they're one and the same beast there. We are nonprofit organizations, and I just highlighted a few bullets that I think are our top mission-related activities. And the first being, to get out there and protect the natural environment, which is core to our mission and our work. Once we've done that, we need to uphold our conservation easements are the most frequently used tool that we use to protect lands. It is a little bit less expensive to acquire conservation easements than it is to acquire land outright in fee simple, though we may do that sometimes. So once we have conservation easements, we do have the responsibility of making sure that the terms are being followed. We also do a lot of programming to educate our landowners and the community at large, and we hope to serve as a resource to everyone, including realtors. And then we take care of the lands, we steward them. And I just wanted to make a note of the picture here is we went to settlement on a property, and this represented a really collaborative effort. It is a conservation easement that is co-held by Heritage Conservancy, Bucks County, and a local township. So as Jim alluded to earlier, for this particular project, it was the 3 entities working together. And again, each one will have input into the construct of the easement and its terms. Okay.
And Kris, just, that reinforcement of while we are monitors of the easement or enforcers of the easement, that sounds very intimidating. We really are here to educate and inform and answer your questions. And we want to be seen as a resource to the real estate community when they have questions about conservation easements. I'm sure Kris has, I know I have had people call me in consultation, landowners, potential buyers, and realtors trying to understand conservation easements better, maybe a specific easement or more broadly. And we're available. You can call us. We're here to work with you and landowners and buyers and sellers. So,
Absolutely.
you ready for me to switch?
Yeah. Yep. So when we are just about to go to closing on a conservation easement, which is a typical settlement, we all gather around the table and sign the documents and hopefully exchange checks. Prior to that, the land trust will prepare what's called the baseline documentation report. And it's a thorough inventory of the condition of the property that is being conserved, its existing conditions, what makes it special. We are, documenting very clearly why this easement is being recorded. So we will have maps, we will have thorough on-the-ground photography of the existing conditions. So the baseline serves a couple different purposes, again, to substantiate why we are placing the conservation easement on the property and explaining exactly what the conservation values are. If a property owner is claiming a tax deduction, this will be very useful, again, in their substantiation of their claim. And then, as Jim mentioned, when we do go out for our annual monitoring visits, we will use this document to refer back to what the conditions were like when the easement was originally recorded. These are great documents. It's surprising how many times we'll sit down at a settlement table. Landowners are typically really impressed and surprised at their property taken in this perspective. And sometimes we realize that they haven't really explored their entire property. So this gives them a unique perspective. And I should also mention, if it's a subsequent landowner buying the property that's subject to easement, we could make a baseline documentation available for them if that was not provided at the time of the sale. So we do, as land trust, one of our responsibilities, we come out to the property once a year, or actually I should say we perform monitoring of the property once a year. Up until recently, that was most likely through an in-person, feet on the ground visit, which was a great opportunity to meet with our landowners, ask any questions, and just stay in touch. With newer technology within the past couple years, both Tinicum Conservancy and Heritage Conservancy have started to incorporate remote satellite imagery in our monitoring practices. So we will work on a rotation schedule. I don't know what Tinicum's is, but right now for Heritage Conservancy, our schedule is once every 3 years, we'll do an on-the-ground visit. And then we'll do 2 visits using satellite imagery. In addition to that, we do a lot of outreach and education. And, you know, pictured here, we have anything from doing outdoor school programming for kids, planting a pollinator meadow at a school, trash cleanups. So a variety of ways, again, for our landowners, communities, realtors to get informed and learn about our organization, as well as the resources that we're trying to protect. And we even have great success. Both organizations do amphibian crossings, and we get crazy volunteers who are just as passionate as we are to come out on rainy nights at about midnight before spring even starts to help these little critters cross the road that would otherwise, unfortunately, get caught under the wheel of the cars. So if you're interested in volunteering with that, we've certainly got a lot of opportunities. Jim, I lost my screen share.
Okay.
I just see you. You're handsome, but I don't see my slides.
Really?
Is that everyone?
You're not seeing.
Yeah, we don't see any of the screen.
Okay. Let's see how I can get it back up. I had something come up on my screen.
Ah, you got bumped.
Let's see. No, I don't want to start from current slide. Anyone seeing anything? No?
Not yet.
Okay.
No.
Let's go back to share screen.
Yep, we can see it now.
Okay, let me put it. Yes, I know they can see it. There we go. Okay.
And then I think you need to go back maybe 3 slides.
Nope, the other way. Okay, so you want to go to this one?
Right here. I'll start here. And you know, a lot of our education and outreach is working with our landowners that hold or that have properties with easements that we hold. But we'll also consider here buyers and sellers. So the landowner that currently owns the property, as well as a prospective buyer, and some things that both should know. The first, I would encourage, whether you own the property or are considering buying a property, is read your conservation easement. Not all folks do this. It's not the most exciting 20 pages you'll ever read. It's a legal document. So some of the sections do get a little thick, but you know, it's important to understand what the limitations of the property are when they're subject to the easement, to see if it is a compatible fit for a prospective buyer. We really try to develop a cooperative working relationship with our property owners. If they have any questions or ideas of what they might want to do, if they're thinking about building a run-in shed or a barn, ask us. As Jim said, we're always here. Better to ask first. We can, you know, think through some varying scenarios together, make sure that it's consistent with the easement, and maybe even think about, you know, a more thoughtful placement for any improvements or, you know, different ideas for uses on the property. And, you know, if you are moving ahead with building a structure or some other use on the property, let us know. Same thing if you're selling the property. it's very helpful for us to know that it is on the market. That way we can have that easement at the ready, be prepared for phone calls and emails that we might receive on the property. When a property is sold, not every easement will have a provision, but there is a report, a small document called a compliance statement, and the land trust will come out, do a monitoring and on the ground in-person monitoring visit, and will either confirm at that time that everything on the property is looking good, it's in compliance, there are no issues, or if there is something, we would identify that. But it gives each party, both the seller and the buyer, confidence that they are in agreement, they know that there aren't any existing issues with the conservation easement. So it's definitely a good idea. I was saying to Jim, if I were buying a property subject to a conservation easement, I would definitely want to see a compliance statement. So as a realtor, that may be something that you suggest your client gets or secures from the seller. If you're representing the seller, maybe have that already prepared that you can offer to potential buyers.
All right. So, realtors as potential partners in conservation. There are a lot of ways you can help, and hopefully it will help you in your business and trying to be the best seller's agent or buyer's agent in these cases. And, Kris mentioned before about the conservation easement itself. While it makes complete sense to have a buyer and a buyer's agent understand that easement, it's also not a bad idea for the seller's agent to review the easement. The seller may or may not know their easement well. So, some of them know it up and down, front and back. Some are more vague about it. Maybe they didn't do a lot of improvements when they were on the property and didn't really spend a lot of time worrying about the easement. So as far as helping, educate yourself about conservation easements. We're going to include 2 sites at the end. The We Conserve PA, which is our professional organization here in Pennsylvania. It is one of the top organizations for land trusts in the country. They really have a lot of good resources there. And then the Land Trust Alliance, which is our national organization. And again, they have a lot of good information. Some of it's very basic and a great place to start. There are some documents that they're one-pagers, you might want to share with someone that's considering buying a conservation easement property so that they know what they're getting into. And then, as we said, reach out to land conservancies. We're here. We get calls all the time from agents, both on the buyers and the seller side. We will do our best to answer any questions you have, any concerns, and also if you're a buyer's agent, what things they may have to want to do on the property. And certainly we can address that and talk to you about whether the easement is likely to allow that. So you're helping us and you're helping your clients certainly by determining whether this particular conserved property meets the values and needs of your client. Some easements, if your client is a farmer and this property is protecting the stream and the forest and the other biological values, it may not be ideal for farming in that case. If you've got someone that wants to have large ATV tracks all over the property, that may not work for certain easements, most easements. But you can see by looking at that, you want to make sure that this fits what your landowner needs. And certainly that you can refer them to us. We'll talk to them and kind of talk them through the easement and some of the limitations as well as the allowances of that document. Certainly encourage buyers to read the easement or talk to their legal counsel and to ask questions of us. We're not here to squelch deals. We hope all of you were able to get your sales and find that right client, but we also are going to inform them about certain issues. And as Kris said, we're problem solvers. We try to work with everyone and find a way to accommodate their needs. But in some cases, what they are looking to do with the property may be in conflict with the easement. And better to find that out before the sale than afterwards. A lot easier to deal with. Kris, anything else on that?
No, I think you touched everything. The one service that we do offer, I don't know, Jim, if this comes up for you. Sometimes a potential buyer is looking for a little reassurance regarding a potential use. So they may ask for a letter of interpretation ahead, just that would, provide them with another level of assurance that what they're looking to do on the property is permitted.
Yep, we will do that. And of course, on certain properties, we're doing this 8 or 10 times. It's very time consuming. On the other hand, it's better to find a buyer who really can work with that property and appreciates the values in the conservation easement. The last point on here, which is a little different, and it's only started to occur in the last few years, is we'll get calls from realtors who are looking or working with buyers who maybe have a property in mind that's not yet conserved, and they want to know whether a conservation easement might provide them some benefits, whether it's cash from a open space bond or a federal income tax deduction. And of course, we're more than willing to talk to people about that and whether the property they're looking at is a priority for us and maybe the funding sources that are local. We can't guarantee anything, but we certainly are enjoying that we get these calls now from realtors. Now, if the buyer is having real trouble making this deal work and having the financial resources, the conservation easement is probably not going to, make up for 50 or 70% of the value of the property. But if a landowner appears to be, or a potential buyer appears to be conservation minded, and this would be a benefit to them, may help them pay down part of the mortgage or whatever they want to use the funds for, you can certainly encourage them to approach us, or you can approach us and we can talk about whether that property is likely to be funded and or an interest to Kris or I's organization. So, and we get to the last part. This is the contact information for Kris and I, and then We Conserve PA, the Land Trust Alliance, and that return on environment report that we mentioned earlier. I know this presentation will be available later, so if you don't get the information now, I know you'll be able to pick it up. We are, as we said, a resource in what we do. So I guess now is the time for any questions in the chat area. Who is able to see that? I'm not.
If you click down at the bottom of your screen with your mouse, you should see like a moving toolbar, and there's a chat box there. I do have it up. I don't see any questions, but just as a reminder to all of our attendees today, if you do have any questions, now's the time, to put them into the chat box so we can all see them and you can get them answered. So I do not see any questions, which just
Can we
means
do a little polling? I was just curious how many of the attendees have worked on a project that involved a conservation easement. Have most folks done that by a raise of hand? Okay,
And we did get a question actually
okay.
but after you're ready, when you're ready, just. let
No,
me-
that's fine. We're ready to go.
Okay, this is from Michelle, popped away. Can an easement interfere with Act 319?
Jim, do
So,
you wanna go ahead?
yeah, no, I mean, often properties are under Act 319 when we're approached by a landowner, so there's not an interference there. Act 319, and it does not affect, let's say it's a new conservation easement, it doesn't affect the value of that appraisal because Act 319, a landowner can leave at any time. They may get penalized if they leave early, but it's considered temporary and not a permanent feature. So the easement, whether the easement comes first or the easement is second, they are not in conflict and they often complement each other in what they're trying to accomplish.
Two more questions popped in, are from Rose. Are the conservation easements ever reversible?
Yeah, we do get this question sometimes, especially if someone is not happy with the language of the easement. The easements, because of either the tax benefits to the original donor, landowner, or the township funding, makes it extremely difficult to reverse an easement. The conservancy or the government agency can't go to a landowner that holds an easement and say, hey, you want to get out of this. They are considered permanent. The federal government, the IRS, does not want someone who got an income tax deduction on a property to now get value back for that land by reversing that and doing something else with the land. The only time I know of, and I'm not an attorney, Kris might have other situations, but let's say there was plans for a interstate highway to go through a property and it pretty much wiped out the conservation easement. In those cases, there would be compensation back to the landowner as well as the conservancy in those cases if they ended up choosing that route through the property or the portion of the property that was impacted.
Yeah,
Kris?
I actually, two examples, with that last, example that you provided. So we had one conservation easement where there was a bridge replacement occurring. And so as Jim just described, there was a certain area with, just outside of the public right of way that needed to be taken out of the conservation easement. Fortunately for this, I mean, it was under 2,000 square feet of land. And so we had to go through that process and we were compensated for our share, even of that small little slice. Another instance was with a municipality that they were trying to make a private road into a public road, and there was a portion of a property that Heritage holds a conservation easement on that was going to be taken for the road. And because this was a different situation, it wasn't, well, I should say there were other alternatives. So Heritage Conservancy, kind of pushed back and said, nope, find another location for the cul-de-sac. And so that's what happened. And we ended up being able to protect the easement and no portion of it was taken out.
So Kris, there is a question from Lynn Benson about partnering with the Pennsylvania State Historical Commission.
Okay.
I know Heritage does work on some historic conservation projects, so you might have more information than we would.
Sure. So We do. Heritage Conservancy's mission is both natural resources as well as historic resource conservation. Sometimes historic preservation means putting a facade easement on a significant structure. That does not happen nearly as often as we do conservation easements. One of the reasons is the lack of funding. So while we have gone through the State Historical Commission for other types of grants, they haven't necessarily been for facade easements.
So the next question is from Daniel Dean, and it's about how does someone determine the effect on price when marketing properties with an easement? And I'll tell you, Daniel, this is a hard one to determine because in some area, when someone does a conservation easement, they are not only protecting the conservation values or the agricultural values of the property, they are also giving up a certain amount of development rights on their property, depending on the ability of how the property is currently zoned and that value. So naturally and logically, you would say, obviously, this property that has the conservation easement on it is going to be worth less than a property that has no conservation easement on it, especially if the restrictions limit the amount of homes or dwelling units on that property. We have found that while that is the case often, you also have areas where there's a lot of conservation easements, and this property, which is conserved, may be surrounded by other conserved properties. And depending on the desires of the people buying those properties, sometimes it's hard to see the difference in pricing. But we're not appraisers either, and you're going to have to look at some of the other sales that go on, just like you would do regularly in trying to determine value. In Bucks County, there's a fair amount of properties that turn over that have conservation easements on them. And that might give you at least a start in determining how do I value this property. But every easement is different. Some may allow for an additional dwelling on the property or two, or some may be restricted to that one area where the dwellings are. So when you look at other comparable sales, you're going to want to look for something that truly is not just the same size, but maybe has similar restrictions within it. And I hope that answers your question, at least partially.
I just wanted to add to that. I think you gave a great explanation. When we are working with property owners that are seeking financial compensation for their easement, as I mentioned before, we do get a qualified appraisal on the property. And it's essentially two appraisals in one. The appraiser will look at the property as if you went out and put the for sale sign in with existing conditions, and they would look at the highest and best use, what the value of the land is today. And we'll just say, for example, it's $1 million. Then they will take a look at the conservation easement that is being proposed. And again, depending upon what is allowed, let's say they can subdivide an extra 3-acre lot off, or they're able to build several outbuildings, or if it's more restrictive, the appraiser will take that into consideration. So let's say for the easement that we're talking about now, the realtor were to look at that and say, what is the value of the land after the easement is placed on it? And they may say, now it's only worth $600,000. And the difference between the two is the conservation easement value. So for this example, it would be looking to get either the property owner compensated for that whole value, a portion of it, and they may be able to take a tax deduction for that. But within the appraisal, it will look at valuations of unrestricted properties and then do another analysis of properties, again, similar properties that are subject to conservation easements.
That's a great explanation, Kris.
Thanks.
So it doesn't look like we have any more questions.
We
There
have
is
one.
one, you see that one, Kris, one that
Oh.
came in from Michelle?
Okay. Yeah, do you have easements that still allow farming, or have most been restricted to retain view sheds? We definitely have easements that allow farming. I don't know the percentage for Kris, but I would say half our properties have some type of allowance for farming and agricultural uses. The restriction on view sheds, can be a tricky one within easements. And I know with the ag easements, we try to make sure that we balance out the ability of someone to farm a property. If you can't, I know in Tinicum and Nakamixon area, if you're going to grow something and you can't put up a 10-foot deer enclosure, all you're doing is feeding the deer and giving them lunch. So, we work with landowners on that and the practical things that go with farming easements. Some of the older easements are trickier because they may say that a farmer can farm, but then they limit certain improvements, which for certain types of farming may be difficult. But we definitely, we love having conservation easements with farmlands. We love the CSAs and seeing successful farmers, especially young ones, which are starting out. We try to match up young farmers with landowners who may not be using their property for agricultural purposes, but might be ideal for that. It's a tough match sometimes finding people that have the same values, but we have several that are under the Conservancy where we've been able to match up potential farmers with landowners. So.
Yep, and I would say, Heritage does as well. More recently, we've been partnering with the Bucks County Agricultural Land Preservation Program. Both the county and the state put funding towards those easements, and that is primarily to keep active ag alive. So that is the purpose for those easements. And then, so that's one end of the spectrum. And then on the other end, there may be zero farming allowed. And then depending what the natural resources are, the intent of the grantor, there'll be some compromise middle ground of how much farming is allowed.
Kris, I was thinking back to one thing, which was, someone had mentioned about extinguishing easements, and we said how difficult it is. Another thing is amending an easement. And, a lot of folks will approach us and they assume that as long as the two parties can agree to the terms, no big deal, we'll just change it. It's another agreement. Our easements, though, are set up with, like we said, either funding from a government agency and or the donation, which the IRS is interested in. So we have strict limitations on amending easements. It requires that we increase conservation for the property, so the landowner would have to give up some additional very concrete, maybe they reduce a building envelope or even eliminate a building envelope in return for amending that easement. But the other thing we can't do is return financial value to the landowner, because remember, they were paid for those development rights or received an income tax deduction. So it has to be net neutral. If they get something in return, the Conservancy has to gain conservation value, and it's got to net out any return of value to the landowner. So there's a lot of times where we have to say no to an amendment. They're difficult to do. We've done a couple, but very few over the years. I don't know with Kris's organization how many amendments you've done.
Yeah, we certainly have done some amendments. As you said earlier, we've evolved in how we write our easements. I like to think we're doing a better job now than we did, 30 years ago. So there are opportunities to really take advantage of perhaps a poorly written document or one that is unclear. And in addition to getting a net conservation benefit, well, that's actually part of the benefit now, is you have a stronger document. And it's interesting, I think, in addition to the considerations for the natural resources that we're looking to protect as nonprofits, which you touched on, Jim, which is, it's a separate issue from, it may make sense to, extinguish this right and grant someone else the right to do something else environmentally. It could make all the reason in the world, but if it is conveying an impermissible private benefit as a nonprofit, we cannot do that. So there definitely are limitations to what we can amend in easement, but where it does make sense, we will consider it.
So we're at 12:57 for our hour-long webinar, and I want to thank everyone. I want to thank the Bucks County Realtors for allowing us to do this presentation today. And again, Kris and I are available, as well as any other land trust that's out there. They'll be more than willing to talk to you about any questions you might have. But thank you again.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Thank you, Kris, for spending time this afternoon educating our members. We truly appreciate your time. And as mentioned, this recording and their presentation, which does have their contact information, will be sent out on Monday or Tuesday to everyone. So thanks all, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Happy Friday.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Bye-bye.